a show that tackles the big issues affecting the BVI and the rest of the Caribbean. Searches for answers to today's big questions and gives viewers a unique perspective on developing stories. Follow the big story with me, Kathy Richards, only on JTV. This show is brought to you by the National Bank of the Virgin Islands, Cyril B. Romney Tertola Pier Park, NV Salon Spa Nail and Barbershop, HOV Medical, and Digicel. Sign up for Digicel Plus Home Light Bundles, faster internet, movies, and sports. This is The Big Story. I'm Kathy Richards. I want to thank you so much for joining us for this edition. In studio with me is Dr. Bryan Wilson, a marine biologist, and he's here in the Virgin Islands from the United Kingdom to conduct a number of studies and initiatives. Dr. Wilson, it's a pleasure to have you here in studio with us.
Amazing. I'm so glad to be here and kind of share what we've been doing the last couple of weeks.
Awesome. So give us a little background of who you are and why you're here in the Virgin Islands.
Okay, I'm a research fellow at the University of Oxford in the United Kingdom. I work on coral reefs around the world, and what I'm looking at is how those coral reefs are impacted by climate change and how they're recovering after we have these kind of big warming events and hurricanes and things like that, and whether those reefs are resilient, whether they're going to be able to survive. I work in a number of different reef systems across the world, but I've been working in the Caribbean for probably about the last 10 years, mostly in St. John and occasionally in the Honduras, in the far kind of west of the Caribbean. But had this opportunity to come to the Virgin Islands and Tortola and Virgin Gorda last year for a week. I had to cut that trip short to rush out to the Indian Ocean to save a coral from extinction. But I'm absolutely so happy to come back and spend much more time here on the islands and meet more enthusiastic, wonderful people.
Awesome. Coral tissue loss is one of the biggest things I think that we've been dealing with for quite some time. Tell us a little bit about what you are finding while you're here when it comes to that aspect.
So, yeah, I mean, one of the big issues we have with coral reefs around the world at the moment is that they're not just being hit by one thing. The big one, of course, is climate change and the warm waters, and they're becoming more acidic as well, and this is very difficult for corals to survive in. And if it was just that, I think coral reefs probably would struggle through. But when you put on top of that, a lot of these reefs are overfished, which means the fish are basically like the landscape gardeners, and they keep the coral reefs clean and kind of manicured. We also have runoff coming from land, so if you've got farming or agriculture, you get fertilizer and soil, especially here when you get a hurricane comes through and you get huge amounts of rain dumped on the islands. You might have seen here in the islands that you get these big plumes of muddy water that go out, and they smother the reefs and they stop the corals from harvesting the energy of the sun, and that makes them stressed. And then of course we have things like stony coral tissue loss disease, which is just one of a long line of diseases that has come through and hit these corals. And this is what we're seeing around the world, is that corals are being hit from so many different sides. And it's a bit like us I tend to think when we don't sleep, and I think I mentioned to you that I'm not sleeping so much on the islands now because the roosters are waking me very early. It means I'm a little bit stressed, and I can't handle things as well as if I had a good 9 or 10 hours of sleep. Surviving at about 4 or 6 at the moment, and that probably shows in my face and the bags under my eyes at the moment. But corals are like that. So when corals are tired and when they're stressed, it means that they can't really take any other stresses. And so stony coral tissue loss is basically like a cold for corals. We're now my feeling is we're starting to see less and less stony coral tissue loss, and I think there's 2 reasons there. One is that most diseases have this, a bit like COVID, of course. They do a big curve, and what they've done is the disease has possibly killed off a lot of the corals, and now the corals that are actually still alive are probably so far apart that if you have a diseased coral, it can't actually give another coral a disease because they're so far. So we see this very natural curve where a disease comes through, big peak, and then it tails off. And I'm hoping now and I'll have to check the literature on this, but we might be seeing kind of the tail end of stony coral tissue loss.
Awesome.
Possibly for another disease to come in. I don't,
oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So with stony coral tissue loss being a little bit now on the side, what is the most prevalent issue you're finding with the marine life?
So here, you know, in the last 3 weeks, I've been diving here and studying as many reefs and sites around these incredible islands as I can. And the big issue I'm seeing at the moment is basically seaweed growing on the reefs. And this is what we call macroalgae. I suppose on the land when you're looking, that is manifested in sargassum blooms. You're seeing these incredible sargassum blooms, and just as I was coming from Nanny Key this morning, I turned the corner, and it's a very nostalgic smell, but a terrible smell, that smell of the rotting sargassum. Mm-hmm. And I smiled when I smelled it because it reminded me of being here last year. It seemed a lot worse last year, but on the reefs as well, when we dive down, we see a lot of these reefs are covered in these very kind of bushy kind of seaweeds, and we're not meant to see reefs looking like that. And the big issue there is that, and this is what I'm actually here to investigate, is if a reef is very, very healthy, those landscape gardeners I talked about, which are the fish, but in my case, much more importantly, is the sea urchins. The sea urchins are, I like to think of them as these, when you look, I suppose in Silicon Valley, you imagine these big grand houses that have these little robot lawnmowers that bounce around the garden, kind of trimming the grass and keeping it all short. That's what the urchins are like. And dare I say, almost 40, 50 years ago, I suppose, you'd have gone out onto a reef and you'd have seen corals everywhere. You wouldn't have seen so much seaweed, and every single little nook and cranny in the reef would have had these little spines sticking out of it. I've got so many sea urchin spines in me from diving all over the world. I'm probably 20% urchin at the moment. Since the 1980s, we've seen a huge crash in the urchins. They had a major disease that swept through and killed almost all of them. Then over about 20, 30 years, they kind of came back very, very slowly. And then I think in about the 2010s, a separate disease hit them again, and we've seen this massive spike loss. And this has really impacted the reefs, because we call these urchins ecosystem engineers. They literally keep the reefs clean. And one of the big problems we have is that we're losing a lot of corals. And when corals produce these babies kind of once a year, I think we're coming up to the time when they produce these babies, August, September, in the Caribbean. These little babies are swimming out looking for a place to settle down and call home. And there's nothing available. The seaweed have basically mopped up every single last bit of reef. And where usually the urchins would have kept these areas clean so that the baby corals can land, where we're now seeing that the baby corals are probably struggling to find a place to call home. And this is a big problem for Caribbean reefs in particular, I think.
Okay. What's the solution to that? That's interesting.
So the solution is something I'm here to obviously try and research at the moment. And one of the things that we can try and do, and I've talked about these different stresses that we've got. Climate change is something that it's almost impossible for us to affect on a local level. I mean, there's a number, of course, very huge nations that contribute massively to climate change. I suppose the USA, India and China would be the big kind of emitters, and that's something that has to be dealt with on a global scale. But there are things we can do on a local scale, little things we can do. We can take the pressure off the reefs. And these could be things like one of the big initiatives I've been trying to talk about, and I met with the permanent secretary the other day, who was incredibly enthusiastic about what we were doing and very supportive, is, for instance, things like if there's a development going on around the island, try and make sure that you're not changing the natural course of water so that you're creating these big plumes that go out. Try not to damage any reefs that are there. Maybe there's a chance that you could protect certain reefs and stop people diving and fishing on them for a year at a time and give those reefs a chance to just recover and grow. My particular aspect is looking at the urchins. Is there a way that we can actually boost and bolster the natural populations of the urchins so that these landscape gardeners can actually get back onto the reef and do their jobs and kind of remove what we call in ecological terms is a recruitment bottleneck, which is where we're finding that babies can't settle, baby corals can't find a place. And if we can clear these reefs with these urchins, when those baby corals come up, they can settle everywhere, and then we can start to rebuild these reefs that the Caribbean is so famous for.
Oh, awesome! So the orchards, they usually eat the seaweeds away.
Absolutely, they do. They are voracious. And one of the things that I'd really like to be able to do here, and I'd love to come back with some footage of this, is put cameras out on the reef. The urchins only really come out at night. They hide away in these crooks and crannies during the day, and then if you ever do a night dive, which we did last night, the urchins all come out. And sometimes in days long gone, and I've only seen it a couple of times, you'll swim across the seafloor and the entire seafloor will be a bristling mass of spines. And when you swim over the urchins, they tend to bristle and start shaking because they're trying to stab you. And they sometimes do poke me, you know, but what I'd like to be able to see is that back again and the big idea I have here is for the BVI to be a model. I would like to prove this concept here in the Virgin Islands, and if that then works, we then go regional, and we use the BVI as a model system. And I'd like every other Caribbean island to look at what we do here and try and recover their reefs in very much the same way.
Why of all the Caribbean countries, why the Virgin Islands?
Oh, and I'd love to be able to say it's because they're the most beautiful islands. And maybe I should just stay there, shouldn't I? I mean, it's because, of course, this is it's a British overseas territory. Okay. And at the moment, the British government is very, very much supportive of enhancing the biodiversity of its UK overseas territories. So the BVI, I suppose, is going to be the model system for other of the UK overseas territories. So if this works, it's already been suggested that maybe we take these ideas to Montserrat, Anguilla, Turks and Caicos. But the BVI is the first. I mean, let's be fair. And the support I've got from the islands here, and certainly from the ministry, is extraordinary, and I'm really grateful for that.
Well, one of the other things that everyone are concerned about, and you spoke about the pungent smell that we get from seaweeds when they begin to rot. The fact is that these seeds cannot germinate unless they come in and lodge on the reefs. Do you think a program to capture seaweeds while they're out sea, because they come in this large stream, and there have been so many discussions and conversations around tackling the issue of seaweed coming in. Is there a possibility of any project or of any type that can work towards eliminating, to a greater extent, the influx of seaweeds?
I mean, this is slightly out of my range of expertise here, but I've been monitoring the situation for so long, and when we first started seeing these sargassum blooms come in probably the last decade, of course, me and my colleagues just sighed and went, okay, something else now that we have to deal with in the Caribbean. And because the Caribbean has been hit by so many different things, we kind of call it kind of like a I suppose a coral reef hotspot. And when I say hotspot, I mean in terms of the threats. I mean, the coral reefs here in the Caribbean seem to be hit harder than pretty much anywhere else in the world. Sargassum blooms, of course, these are coming in from the Sargassum Sea, and I'm still not entirely sure why that's happening. A lot of people say it's about this increased land use, so you're seeing kind of fertilizer coming in, maybe from the Florida Keys around there. There's these big inputs into the ocean. Another theory I've heard being said is, of course, that we're seeing, and this kind of bewilders me, but also kind of, it scares me slightly as well, is we're seeing increased desertification in Africa, and so we're seeing these winds sweeping up the Saharan desert dust, and this is, of course, being driven across the Atlantic, dropping into this ocean and seeding the ocean with all these kind of nutrients. And so, again, I sit there thinking, how do we address these things? And you think, well, maybe we have to address desertification in the Sahara. That's not something you can do locally in the Caribbean. But what you can, I suppose, do here is maybe put up these big booms, and collect these things and stop this sargassum from coming out. A lot of people I know around the world now are trying to turn this into a good thing, so potentially sweep up the sargassum or any algae, I think, and use it for fertilizer, for kind of land. And so there are a whole bunch of methods, I think. I'm not sure if it's going to go anytime soon, but it's at a local level, I suppose all you can really do is collect that sargassum as it comes in, bring it onto land, and I don't know, and try and do something with it, I think.
Awesome. So while you were here during your past 3 weeks, who have you been working with? I guess I know you have not been going diving all by yourself for most part of it. Tell me about who have been coming along with you and getting some bit of education and working together.
So I've been working with some incredible people here, and in the 3 weeks, I'm here for almost a month or maybe 5 weeks. And I've been trying to meet as many different people as possible. And because, whilst I deal with the science, the kind of actions that I'm talking about bringing to the Caribbean require community. It requires the island as a community to kind of pitch in and kind of help out in any way, whether it's by surveying these reefs when people are diving or snorkeling and telling me how they look, to simply picking up plastics on the beach and bringing sargassum off. These are efforts that need to come from the community in general. I work with the Association of Reef Keepers, so that's Dr. Shannon Gore, and she's a co-project leader with me. beyond the reef, Chris Duradin has been extraordinary. I mean, he's been providing almost all of the logistics. He's been taking me out on the boats, he's been giving me tanks, he's been giving me this knowledge of the reefs and the islands. I mean, that man knows the way the water moves around these islands like nobody other. I mean, I sometimes check his neck to see if he's actually got gills. I do feel like he's a fish on land. He took us up to Anegada last weekend, and I was blown away by Anegada. Anegada is probably the most beautiful reef system that I've dived on in the Caribbean. It's like a jewel. It's a jewel in the Caribbean, and one of the things I've already started talking about, and I'm very, very keen to come back here and set up this project where I come back every year and I go and do these surveys, and we start to build this very formal survey of the reefs so that I can feed back to the permanent secretary and say, okay, these are the reefs that need the most protection. Maybe these are the healthiest reefs. We've got to keep these ones as almost like seed banks. So when these corals produce their babies, these babies then spread to other reefs around the island. So I think we need to focus on priority reefs. Anegada, it's obviously a little bit away, but that should be, my feeling is that should be protected and kept absolutely sacred. It's an extraordinary system, and I've only had one day here, but I'm very much hoping and talking with Chris that we might come back and spend a lot more time on Anegada, because an extraordinary system. I've been meeting with various peoples, of course Argel at the ministry as well, which is incredible. I'm hoping to meet up with some folks at the college as well. I met with 284, I think it was, Jahphix there, and very exciting. I mean, I did a wonderful interview with them. Obviously been chatting with the BVI Beacon as well, so Freeman, he's written I'm sure it's already written now, but an incredible article, I think, yesterday. Haven't had the time. We've been doing so much science, and these days have been very long. I really was hoping to get to schools, to the Elmore. Is it Elmore? That's so
important. Elmore South High School,
And I think the college, I've come at the right time, the wrong time for the college. I think the students have now finished. Hoping that I might be able to come back in January, when I think there might be a lot more people around to do things. So, but I mean, anyone you can suggest I talk to that I haven't talked to yet, please do let me know.
Okay, from what you would have said about the Anegada Reef, is it at risk as much as other reefs around the islands?
That's a great question, Kathy. I'm so glad. I mean, we haven't scripted this at all, of course, and
no.
That would be the question I would ask you to ask me, because one of the things I look at is remote coral reefs around the world that basically have no humans living on the islands, and one of the things that we notice there is that the only thing affecting them is climate change. And so those reefs, I mean, they're affected by climate change because, of course, climate change is global. But because they haven't got any other things affecting them, like fishing, like farming, like tourism, which, of course, is a major factor, then these reefs, they bleach and they're damaged and they get occasional disease, but they recover so much more quickly because they've got no other stress. Anegada is almost like the, and I wish I could travel much more around the Caribbean, but it's your remote reef. It's your reef that doesn't have much impact. Okay. You know, there aren't so many people that go out there. By the sounds of it, very few people dive there. It's the first reef I would think of as almost a beacon for how other reefs around Virgin Gorda and around Tortola, how they should be looking. If someone would say to me, how do you want the reefs around Tortola and Virgin Gorda to look? I'd say, like Anegada. Don't get me wrong. Anegada has suffered like all reefs have, but I'd say it's probably suffered less. And I think it's because there aren't any of these other impacts that we certainly have. Of course, when I approached Anegada, it looks so different to any other. Super flat. This actually looks like the islands we see in the Indian Ocean. Okay. So there's no runoff. Of course, tourism is very, very highly regulated there, and I'd like to see the Anegada system adopted at other reefs around the Virgin Islands.
Okay, is the seaweed an issue over there?
Not nowhere near as much. The reefs looked very, very clean. The corals that I saw there were, massive. The biggest corals I'd seen in all my time in the Caribbean, going back to 2016. Wow. I saw corals that were decades, even potentially a century old, and that's a very rare thing to see in the Caribbean. And there were a couple of times where I almost forgot how to breathe underwater because I was focused on these incredible brain corals that I hadn't seen the like of here. I see them certainly in my sites in the Indian Ocean and the South Pacific where we might expect to see them, but Not here in the Caribbean. We're told that the Caribbean is what we call a depauperate reef system, a stressed, impacted reef system. But Anegada was a beautiful surprise, really was.
The other and final point that we could talk about, waste disposal or waste and plastic and all of that in the sea. Is that a major issue that you have seen here?
You know, I have to be honest, Kathy. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, they're having plastic washing up in kind of Antarctica, you know, which is one of the most, I mean, if not the most remote region in the world. And even in the Indian Ocean where I work, which is one of the most, I mean, again, one of the most remote reef systems in the world, the beaches are covered in plastic bottles and flip-flops and fishing line and everything. And this is a problem the world over. So, unfortunately, the Caribbean is certainly not immune to those effects. And yeah, I mean, ocean cleanups, plastic cleanups is an incredible thing, but it's scratching the surface of the problem. What we really need to address is at source. People should obviously be trying not to use single-use plastic, and I know it's difficult. And I've said to my colleagues that are working with me on the island, you've got to understand that we're on an island now. It's very difficult to address sustainability when you haven't got the land to grow your own crops. Although, of course, I mean, Beef Island, I mean, it used to, I hear the history of the islands that you were much more sustainable in your history. And of course, tourism is putting much more pressure on bringing things in from overseas. Yeah, that's something that has to be addressed again at a policy level, and I don't have the answers for that. I mean, I can make suggestions, but that's a really difficult thing. On the one hand, you've of course got to keep bringing tourists in because tourism is a major driver of the economy. How to do that sustainably is, beyond me, I think.
Okay. All right. Dr. Wilson, great having you here. Great to know that, you know, you're looking forward to recommending the Virgin Islands as a pilot for some of your studies that you're doing. We'll be happy to know how this unfolds. But as we close out, what is the one thing that you would say to our governments? What is that one thing you to say to our organizations, NGOs and others? And what is that one thing you'll say to us, individuals who reside here on this territory as we seek to better our lives by protecting our marine life?
Oh, that's a big question. For the governments, I'd say, you know, you obviously would have it within your power to make these changes that then filter down to individuals. It's much harder for individuals to make a change if it doesn't come from the kind of the top down. For the NGOs, I mean, they're already doing fantastic jobs, and the NGOs I've met here have been extraordinarily enthusiastic about what they do. And what I'm kind of saying is, you know, every time you dive down on those reefs, tell me what they're like. Tell me if you're seeing changes. Much as I would love to be here all the year round, I don't. I have a job at the university, and I have to be there to kind of teach students and kind of bring the next generation of scientists up. But what I would say to the NGOs is, you know, keep in touch with me and let me know how everything's going, and then we can feed back and forth. As individuals, I find this, and I hope this isn't controversial, but when I'm here, I find that my overwhelming feeling for people on the islands is nonchalance, and I come here and I'm blown away by the beauty of the islands, and I hope that when I'm speaking to people here on the islands that they maybe step back and think, wow, this where we live is an extraordinarily beautiful place, and I get the feeling that maybe people here forget how beautiful these islands are.
Wow.
And I'm not meaning to come from off island and say, wow, look at what you've got, but to see it through my eyes again, which is almost like the eyes of a child, you know, and to come here for the first time and say, wow, this is amazing. One of the things that I've really would like to, you know, really talk about more is talking with the older generation here and having them tell their stories. And I've talked to so many wonderful islanders here that say their grandparents talk about these reefs. For instance, in Brewers Bay, which was one of the saddest dives that I've done in my life, which was like a graveyard. It was an awful thing to see because I could see this shadow of how a coral reef used to look. And I was chatting to one of the guys that whose grandparents have grown up in Brewers Bay, and these grandparents would tell these stories about how they would literally swim out 10, 15 meters from the shoreline and just see this rainforest beneath the waters of corals and fish and anemones, and of course we don't see that anymore. And what we have now is children and certainly tourists that come to the islands and they dive here and they say, wow, these reefs are absolutely beautiful. And I want to say, well, no, they're not. You know, you're seeing them for the first time and you think this is how coral reefs should look. It's not how coral reefs should look. And so we need to bring in this older generation to tell these stories of how these reefs used to look, and hopefully that'll feed back into in storytelling to the younger generations. And maybe that will be a way for the younger generation to say, okay, something has gone wrong. Something has broken where we're not seeing the systems that our grandparents saw. I'm sorry to end.
You have me in awe there, sad to know that, we'd have like almost totally lost the reefs there in Brewers Bay, but great information, keep it honest so, we can become aware and do what's necessary to protect it.
For me, the coral reefs are your islands.
Yeah.
Your entire, everything that you are as an islander is wrapped up in what those coral reefs bring to you. It's the protection they offer from hurricanes. It's the fish they provide for your dinner table. And of course, it's the tourism that brings money into the islands. And I worry when I dived on Brewers Bay, I saw this nightmare vision of a Caribbean future if we don't change at the moment. And I really want to end on a
That's okay. It's honesty, so let's have it.
I want to end on a statement of hope. First and foremost, one of the things that the generations beforehand could claim was ignorance. We didn't know what we were doing to the reefs. We didn't know that throwing litter into the islands would pollute them. And we can accept that, and we understand that ignorance was a thing of the past. We just didn't have the knowledge. We don't have that anymore. The children that I talk to today, they are so switched on. They know everything about the environment, and they know what world they're growing up into. And that is a beautiful thing. This hope that I have that these voters of the future will speak with their vote. We're not at the point of no return yet. Okay. And that's something I really want to address. We are at this point now where we're getting close. Okay. If we don't do anything, if we just carry on living our lives as normal, every reef is going to look like Brewers Bay. But I'm hoping that if I speak to enough people and we get our message out, people will pay attention and realize that we can do something now, and there is a chance that we can save this, and that these grandchildren can hopefully see the reefs that their grandparents would have seen.
Awesome. Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for your honesty. Thank you so much for your time. And it's my fervent prayer and wishes that, that hope can come to life and we get more and more educated. Such platforms like these are available to you and to others so that we could keep that messaging out there so that we can do better. Thank you so much again for your time, and thank you for the pleasure of your time. I'm Kathy Richards with this edition of The Big Story.
We know that where you choose to bank matters, and it is your vote on what your funds do in strengthening our community. As your official Bank of Paradise, we invest and support the lifeblood of our economy by helping in the realization of personal goals for homeownership, education, and entrepreneurial visions, which support small businesses. We make it our place to connect with persons and worthy causes, and we have been doing so for more than 30 years. Where your money goes and what your dollars empower are your choice. And we thank you for choosing us, a bank that gives where it matters the most, for you, for our community, and a happier tomorrow. The National Bank of the Virgin Islands.
Are you searching for new home decor items that reflect the season's latest trends? Look no further than Right Way Home. From cushion sets to decorative vases, we have unique pieces to suit every style and budget. Discover your right find at the right price, only at Right Way Home and Right Way Stores.